Thank you very much, Sven. Thank you, Dennis. I know the senior echelon. And even more senior, you have Sharon. To Layton's for obviously helping out with the venue. Thank you very much. Other board members, EXCO members, ladies and gentlemen. Also to acknowledge Maria, who's the charge at the South African High Commission here in London. So it's quite an honor to have you here. Well, it's been quite a week since we started. When you asked me to give this talk, it's been ongoing. A week is a long time in politics. Well, this has been at another rate. I mean, it's just today that President Ramaphosa had given his response to his speech. So his speech is almost has moved on. But I think what's important is that what's happening in the world, from my perspective, is that previously sort of countries focused on domestic issues. They wouldn't really look at foreign policy impacting on domestic policy. But we've got this blurring of lines between domestic policy and foreign policy. But I thought that's where it stopped, but it has not stopped there. We've almost moved to an extent with COVID because we saw with what happened there with global developments impacting, having local implications. And we could see how it impacted on the cost of living in the UK, in South Africa, and so forth, the cost of gas, and how that impacted. But what we didn't expect is now we have another element. We are having a situation when internal domestic political developments are having an impact international. So South Africa is now facing an issue where an ideological position is being taken by a foreign government in its foreign relations. I spoke on ENCA the other day, and one of the things I raised was Marco Rubio, the new Secretary of State, said every dollar spent, every program pursued, every policy undertaken has to satisfy three criteria. America must be safer, America must be more prosperous, and America is more stronger. But what it didn't mention, and that is where the unusualness comes in, the unpredictability comes in, and where South Africa is unique. And this calls for a very different type of solution. And that is, if countries do not align with ourselves ideologically, because stepping into this particular area of expropriation, of so-called certain groups being disadvantaged, we're moving into a very domestic social issues of another country. Now, with Mexico, with Canada, with even the EU, China, and possibility with Britain, with the steel tariffs, these are trade-related matters. South Africa stands out. With Panama, it was about the canal, and obviously they had to not to renew the Belt and Road Initiative, which is an initiative of the Chinese government to promote infrastructure and to enhance its influence. They've had to step back. Denmark with Greenland, it's about land. But South Africa, it's about ideology. It creates a very different idea about how are we going to actually deal with this particular issue. So that impact. So when the president spoke at his sonar, he had a very difficult task, because if I looked at previous sonars, and I've covered sonars from 1995, when Mandela made his first sonar, and that was when South Africa, he was mentioning we were going to start bilateral relations with the United States, Binational Commission with EU. And if you fast forward 25 years later, I've not seen a speech of this magnitude where international policy and relations are on the first page. It's almost at the beginning of the speech. I know we used to, at the foreign ministry, we used to send our little snippets, but it would never make the first page. It would possibly make a paragraph on the last page. So this is quite a change now. And it speaks to what the chamber has been doing, which is very important. The chamber has been spearheading the idea of geopolitics in the boardroom. So we had this idea of geopolitics moving from the back room to the boardroom, from meeting rooms to cabinet rooms, from dinner tables to round tables. But now we have geopolitics moving from departmental speeches to a national arena in the form of a sonar. So we can see how this particular issue keeps growing and becoming of greater significance. So I tried to break it down, and I think there are three things worth mentioning in the sonar. One, the president focused on local issues. Of course, on nation building, the national dialogue, and so forth, and the challenges around that. I'll come to that. The second thing the president mentioned was on foreign policy implementation, but also the challenges that now South Africa faces, and globally people do face foreign policy challenges. For me, what was important is how do you integrate the two of them? Because in the speech, the president very cleverly integrated South Africa's value system, South Africa's approach to its own challenges, and he used that to say it is that approach that will inform how South Africa will then approach the challenges internationally. And I'll come to that. So there were very interesting three parts to that speech, especially the merger of the two. And I think we'll increasingly see heads of states starting to do that in their speeches, because they normally would end with a clarion call. Tuma Mina, if you recall the first speech, this is the President Line's speech. Or Tony Blair's famous ending on his speeches, where the clarion call was move Britain forward again. But here you had foreign policy being integrated into a local call. So looking at the local, the point one is this was the first SONA under a government of national unity. And when I say first SONA, obviously Mandela's SONA was under a government national unity, but the ANC was a majority government national unity. This is not. I mean, this is a minority ANC having to form a majority with other parties. So there's a big difference between that government of national unity and this government. That in that case, the parties could walk out and the country would continue, the ANC would continue. So this was the first SONA. John had spoken at the All Parliamentary Africa Group. And going into the SONA just a week before, and you mentioned an important point, there was a lot of turbulence. There was a talk of a reset. There was talk about issues around expropriation. There was talk around the Bella Act, National Health Insurance Act. And it was a bumpy period. And the question was, how is the president going to make a major SONA speech when he's coming into a speech with this type of turbulence, a lack of unity? That would make it a very difficult speech to give. But it so happened, there was an interview with Steenhuisen, and he said he sat down with the president and they decided it was time to strengthen the partnership and to have a reset. So when the president stood up to speak for SONA, he had the wind behind him, because there was an agreement of national health insurance. The Bella issue was overcome on language admission policy. There was various other issues being discussed where the government of national unity looked much more stable than it did before. And in the government of national unity, it seems like the two main parties, the ANC and the DA, I haven't heard too much of raucous from other smaller parties. So I think that was to the president's advantage. He was therefore in a position to promote the government of national unity in a positive way. And obviously we saw the images on TV where ministers from the DA were turning around, were clapping, were smiling when the president mentioned education, because the DA holds education portfolio in that sense. So I think there was a very positive approach to that, and this played into the president's positive approach to the country. Now, what also was positive is that there was an Ipsos poll conducted in October, and it showed that South Africans believe 4 out of 10 South Africans are of the opinion that the country is now moving in the right direction, and we're very positive about the government of national unity. If you take other Ipsos polls, people in the country were quite negative, and sort of their heads were down. So here was another factor that the president had behind him in giving this speech. There was also a World Bank revised economic growth outlook for South Africa, that South African growth will grow by 1.8%. Obviously, the rand had strengthened, funds were coming back into the country, business sentiment had improved. So there was a lot of good, positive sentiment that was behind the SONA. But what we mustn't forget in all this is that we need to temper the socio-economic challenges. And the president understood this in his speech. Therefore, he focused quite heavily on what the government has done and what the government needs to do honestly and openly, and saying that we want a different future. And the president was very clear with this. We have to understand that South Africa has the highest inequality in the world. The Gini coefficient at 0.67 is the highest in the world. I think it's followed by Brazil. South Africa has an issue with bubblification. In other words, people live in bubbles. If you live in a comfortable bubble, in a privileged bubble, your life is very different if you live outside the bubble. So the bubblification of South Africa shows its inequality and its poverty and the high unemployment rate. And I think we all see that whenever we travel. Also on the 5th of February, the Deputy President, interestingly, in Cape Town, launched the Social Cohesion Index. And it's worth reading for those who want to see that. And it does make for sober reading because it showed that there was a trust issue that was declining in government. There was an issue of diversity that was fraying. So it didn't make very good reading. Respect for social rules were declining. Issues of fairness were declining. Not that much when I looked at the statistics, but those statistics are not heading in the right direction. They need to be heading in a very different direction. So the president in his speech focused on nation building. The national dialogue is something which we all will follow. It's an important CODESA too that the president wants to hold so that all South Africans can play a role and a part in seeing how the country can go forward. And he mentioned this today in his response. He mentioned it as well in his SONA speech. He also mentioned the economy, and for the chamber, this is important, enormous mention of private sector, public sector partnership, private sector investment, private sector in the railways, private sector in energy, in Eskom. So I think there's enormous potential, especially for a country like the UK, as well as for the chamber to see how we can leverage this particular issue. He spoke about Eskom, he spoke about the visa system, the economic transformation, employment through the future green economy, and digitization. That's important, I think, the green economy. And obviously, Britain plays a role in just energy transition in South Africa. He also spoke about Operation Vulindlela, which is about unlocking the infrastructure potential of South Africa. And I think that's something that's really being spearheaded by the Treasury and has to be really pushed forward. What was important, he spoke about the professionalization of the public service. Now, this has been an ongoing debate. What is a professional public service? And I've been very passionate about this issue because I think a lot of South Africa's challenges come from the lack of professionalization of the public service. It's too politicized. It needs to be professionalized. The issue of meritocracy supported by transformation needs to come into place because everybody will benefit. I think until South Africa starts to prioritize meritocracy, I think it's going to have challenges in delivering services at a public level. He spoke about municipal services, and we have failings in municipal services, massive failings. The delivery at municipal level is really poor. And it's where the people really feel service delivery is really where they feel the state can do better. So he mentioned that. He also mentioned crime, health, poverty, and so forth. So these are challenges that the country has. But what's important is with all these priorities being mentioned, we need action. It's now 30 years. We're no longer the teenager we used to talk about. First, we were a child, then we were a teenager, then a young adult that can sort of do something wrong and it's okay, you're a bit naive. But now we're 30 years old. We're kind of getting into adulthood. So we need to deliver and we need to move forward. Also, the three big acts, as I mentioned, the Basic Education Law Amendment Act, the Bella Act, and that's had issue to do with admission requirements, Afrikaans, and so forth. There was a national health insurance, which you can speak about, and the big thing, expropriation, which has made international headlines and which Trump has got his eye on. So those were some of the issues that he covered. He then went on to the global stage. And my view of how we see the world globally is that we went from a unipolar, sort of a bipolar world order, Russia and America. We went to a unipolar world order with America holding the fort. And suddenly we are in a multipolar world order with different countries, emerging countries like India, China, and so forth. So there's a lot of competition and contestation and forming of blocks. We have BRICS, you have G7, you have different groupings that are coming about. So in this dynamic, you have the America First agenda, which we're trying to get our head around and say, where does it fit into this model? And I have a view of it on that, and we can talk about that because I think we've underestimated something, we've missed something in our analysis. The president therefore went into quite detail about the type of world order we have. He spoke about multipolarity, he spoke about geopolitical tensions, he spoke about competition and conflict, he spoke about the rise of emerging powers, the tensions of a trade, technology, ideological differences, shifts in climate change issues. He also spoke about the G20 and South Africa's theme of solidarity, equality and sustainable development, which obviously the USA administration had taken umbrage with because they felt that it falls into a DIE category, and they're not in favor of that kind of approach. So that's something that South Africa will have to convince them. Otherwise, it's also the first on an African continent. The G20 used to be G7 finance ministers, now G20, and it includes obviously South Africa and it includes the AU as well as a member. So very, very important event for South Africa on the world stage. Enormously, the most important 130 meetings are going to take place in provinces in South Africa over the years. So it's so important that it showcases, and it's unfortunate that we have this kind of issue now because they've got to hand it over to America. You've got to work with the partner that you're handing over with. It's an opportunity for South Africa to put its foreign policy on the global stage, to promote Africa and to promote the global South. This is what the president is very strong about. And this is what is and part of the agenda for South Africa for the G20. I think this will be the president's legacy of how he can support Africa's agenda and South Africa's agenda. Africa remains the center of foreign policy. Mandela, when he was in presidency, said we cannot be an island of prosperity in a sea of poverty. And he spoke about the region that South Africa can't afford to be wealthy while the rest of the continent is poor, especially sub-Saharan Africa. So I think this is a very important theme that will come out. He also spoke about the recent peacekeeping issues on the DRC and the importance of South Africa playing its role. And obviously the sad demise of 19 South African soldiers during that peacekeeping operation. He also spoke about the very important concept of solidarity. In South African foreign policy, it's often misunderstood the importance of solidarity because there are countries that helped South Africa during the apartheid days, whether it's Cuba, whether it's Russia, the countries that stood by them. And the principle of solidarity is very, very important to the ANC and obviously in South African foreign policy. He spoke about the Ukraine issue, and we may look at it differently. I may take a different take, others may have a different take. He's trying to bring about peace in a way. He's taken a delegation to Russia. He spoke about Ukraine. They've met with Zelensky. He's part of an African delegation. But how South Africa voted at the UN is a matter of debate. If there's a violation, there's a violation. How do you vote and how do you do that? There was a DIRCO statement that was issued initially that really came out strongly against the kind of the invasion of Ukraine. So that statement still stands.
Sorry, which DIRCO?
DIRCO, Department of International Relations Corporation, the South African Foreign Ministry. I'll try not to use acronyms. Thanks. The president also spoke about multilateralism. This is South Africa's strong point. That's why G20 is so important. South Africa is a country that works within the multilateral systems, the rules-based international order. And if suddenly we find the world not working within that order, it's going to make South Africa's life and other countries quite difficult. So he spoke about reforming the UN. He spoke about the Bretton Woods Institution, the World Bank, and the IMF, so that they're more representative of the global South and the interests and promoting the interests of the global South. But what's interesting in his response, he also said he wants to strengthen trade relations by leveraging diverse global alliances. By implication, we have strong relation with America, strong relation with the UK, but we'll have strong relation with China, BRICS, and we'll have a policy. The policy is called non-alignment. How that works now is going to be very interesting. He also said that we are sending a delegation out into the world to explain South Africa's foreign policy. Obviously, that means going to the United States, engaging with the administration, engaging with Elon Musk as part of the administration, and to see whether it can be explained rationally, clearly, logically, and whether that would be satisfactory. That is outcome we will have to wait and see. So the last point before I close is that merger that I'm finding fascinating, the intersection between national imperatives uh, and then the values of South Africa, its resilience, how it brought the nation together. The president today in his response spoke again of cooperation and collaboration. He gave a wonderful speech in Davos as well on the G20 and how Africa and how South Africa sees the concept of collaboration, very different from being nationalistic and narrow-minded and so forth. And he mentions this in his speech as well. And how to then approach this. So the president is saying that it's through collaboration, through coming together, that's how South Africa will kind of approach the world and give a lesson to the world in terms of cooperation. We'll see how all that turns out, but also it's in reference to what is going on in the world today. He did mention South Africa is resilient and will not be bullied, and the next day you had egregious executive order coming out. So whether there's a link to it, I'm not sure, but it seems to follow some kind of logical order. But he said we'll defend our national interest, our sovereignty, our constitutional democracy. We stand for peace, justice, and solidarity, for non-racialism, and democracy, for tolerance and compassion. So the president has given his view in light of what is happening in the world, how his view kind of coincides with what is the view outside. And I said earlier on, the thing that we really miss and is worth analysis in international relations is that when we looked at a multipolar world order, we still hadn't taken into account that America is still, in many respects, maybe not an absolute superpower, but a relative superpower. It's the largest provider of aid. It's the largest importer of goods and services, largest expenditure on military. Its soft power is enormous. If you take all this together and you suddenly have a United States that has just pulled out of the World Health Organization, that's taken on Canada and said you'll join us as a 51 state, taking on Mexico, Denmark, EU, Panama, and everyone else in the world is falling. Denmark. We have an interesting case here of a very predictable, strong, rules-based country in the Western Alliance working in a way that's unpredictable. And how do countries respond to that? Appeasement, conversation, standing up. So the example of somebody who has done it very well, the Sheinbaum of Mexico. She had direct engagement with the president, and she didn't yell. She was able to get a pause on the tariffs because she offered something. So I'm beginning to think you need to offer something that's better than the punishment you're receiving. So what she offered was, I'll put my troops there and we'll drop migration. That's a fundamental principle and important platform for the US government. So what can South Africa, because my argument is what I haven't covered is AGOA. South Africa, AGOA comes up for review. And even if AGOA is passed, South Africa is going to be in danger of losing its privilege because AGOA is not a trade agreement. It's a trade mechanism. And in 1995, when I was in the US, we were part of that process of negotiating, but it wasn't a negotiation, it was a lobbying because the terms were set by Clinton, are very good terms. So you are in that agreement or in that mechanism at the privilege of the United States Congress, the United States administration. And there's been a lot of heat from members of Congress against South Africa in the last year. But the Biden administration was there to protect South Africa from some of the initiatives and legislation that had criticized South Africa for its relations with China and Russia and military exercises. And South Africa also has not done itself its favor in the way it approached foreign policy, sometimes a bit ad hoc, disjointed with different departments. I think we're reaching a stage where South African foreign policy has to be extremely carefully calibrated, has to be professionally applied, and has to be of the highest standard, because any misstep is going to be extremely costly. So I think the time has come for us to say professionalize the foreign service and start building a foreign service that Madiba had in mind when he told us, whatever your background qualifications, and I was doing law at that stage, you're not coming into the foreign service until you go abroad and get trained. So you can come in and then get trained again and then compete. And that was his principle that sent us to different parts of the world for diplomatic training. Is that standard that we need to bring back in. And there are very good colleagues here who are part of the foreign service, who have worked very hard and are doing an excellent job, and they need a lot of support as well. And it's a pity it was not mentioned in the speeches, because they are your soldiers out there who will have to promote South Africa. So there's a lot there in the speech, and so I think I'll stop there and see if there are any questions that you want. So thank you very much for the opportunity. I do appreciate it. Thank you.
When you said that before the Sona speech, he had the wind behind his back with the DA. The thing is, we South Africans tend to be very optimistic, and we believe. How true is that, though? I mean, because the thing is, you always hear backroom talking about other things. I just want to make sure that the commitment everyone seems to have to the GNU is actually in place, and if it's not just window dressing for a big event and then we go back to the way it was.
Yeah, I mean, definitely there were issues in the background. But I think the GNU, even we saw from Deputy President when he came with the delegation and included ministers from the DA, there was an energy that showed there was a commitment to make this work. And I think in the President's response today, he highlighted that it's 10 different parties, but we've all come together. We're learning how to resolve our differences, and we'll stick together. What he was critical of was that South Africans should find solutions to their own problems and shouldn't go abroad. Because I was also in a situation where we were called into a certain parliament and said, somebody from South Africa said the crime is targeting a certain group, and we had to answer those questions. So I think maybe there are, within the Government of National Unity now, there are opportunities and avenues for different groupings to raise issues that they want to raise. If they're not satisfied, obviously they have a right to follow whatever course they had. But I have a sense that the GNU has worked. It's necessary. Without the GNU, what do you have? I think the DA is committed to growth and jobs and to ensuring that it remains sort of South Africa remains moderate and it doesn't move too far to the left or the right. So I think I think from the reading, I can't see anything. The people were raising the issue of 2027. Next year's local government election, 2027, the president will no longer be the president of the ANC, but hopefully be the first South African president to see 2-year terms out. Mandela obviously voluntarily stepped back. So I see, there is definitely momentum for the GNU, and there's interest. I think what holds it together is parties know if they leave, what's the option? So that's a glue.
Last chance saloon type.
That's a glue of the GNU.
Yeah, definitely.